the management and the communication between owner and dog within a living setting first before someone can even help you with the training.
Understanding the basic psychology of the dog you have in your house is quite important.
In what situations have you had him bite people, just so that I'm aware of it?
Feeding would be the main thing if you get near his bowl.
Yeah.
In the weekend, he gets real standoffish at night when he's tired, so he was in his crate, and admittedly our friend that got bitten had a bit too much room, he got a bit too brave.
Yeah.
And yeah, he got him there.
Okay.
My mate Mike, that was just a random one. He was kind of being rough and tumble with him and just didn't like it at that point. Yeah, but most of the time it's around food.
And when he was roughhousing and playing with him, was that when you're roughhousing and you're like, oh, I've had enough, and then you push him away, and then he's nipped, or is it like he just kind of wound up?
He doesn't give the warning. He basically just goes straight for the bite.
So he goes what, sorry?
Just straight for a bite. That's what happened with our friend on the weekend. He didn't even growl or anything.
Okay.
Just nothing.
Right. And so that situation on the weekend where he wasn't there.
No, he was in the kennel.
Oh, yeah.
That was when he bit our friend late at night, but we were just sitting at the table when he got our friend Mike.
Yeah. Okay. And then what does he do after he bites?
Straight to his kennel, cowers.
Oh yeah. Okay. Like, did he take himself into the crate in that instance, or did you guys put him in there?
No, he just takes himself.
Okay, so when you tell him off, he will go to his crate?
Yeah, he'll try to, yeah.
So in that instance where he bit your friend, what happened prior to him going into the crate?
What did happen?
Like, was there a reason for him going to the crate, or did he just
He just kind of cowers off.
Cowers off?
Yeah, he knows he's done something.
He knows he's done something.
He's guilty almost.
And then he cowers off, and then he was kind of cowered off, and then someone came along, and then that's when he bit them.
I know that one was probably a couple of hours later, same night. Yeah.
Yeah, so the second bite happened because he was in his kennel already, and someone was sitting there. Like you said, he had a few drinks, so he was like, "Oh, we said warn him, don't go near him," because I think it's that confined space, feels safe in there. And then if someone's coming into it, I think that's me bit him.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this can be kind of related. Have you guys heard of the term resource guarding before?
Yeah.
Yeah. So resource guarding can be caused from a couple of different reasons. One can be like a dog that's insecure in situations. It can feel like it needs to protect resources. Another reason can be the dog is just a very defensive, very confident dog. In this case, I'm thinking it's more leaning towards more of the insecure type reaction than a confident being more of a dominant dick, essentially. The biggest thing is kind of identifying how you guys are telling him off firstly, and what that looks like, and how he's responding to that, and then how we're responding to that. So it's kind of a massive feedback loop. Okay, and that e-collar there, what have you used that for up until this point?
Originally that was from the past trainer, so the beeps and shocks. He actually reacts really well to just the beeping, so thankfully we don't have to use the shock as often. So the beeping is what we use for if our friends are around and he starts getting a bit funny, we'll beep him to get him away. Like funny in terms of just dipping his head and things like that. Okay. We'll just beep it. We have used the shock a couple of times in the weekend with the bite when he bit Mike. To get him away, we use the minor shock, and that reacts him to get him off straight away. Okay. And we did, with the food training we did originally, we had to use that when we were essentially trying to get close to feed him out of our hand and things like that. That's when that came in as a backup. If he went for our hand, he would get shot to stop.
Okay. Okay, so there can be some repercussions to, we use e-collars and there's a right and a wrong way to use them. There can be repercussions to the way that you've been taught to use it. Okay, and a lot of the time if you correct the dog for warning signs, they stop showing warning signs and they just bite. So there could be say the trainer told you to correct him when he growled. Yeah. Essentially what the growl is him saying that's imagine if I told you you're starting to make me feel uncomfortable and I go, hey, I'm feeling uncomfortable, and then say you told me off for saying that, then I started going, you know, that would be my only response. Yeah. So potentially that's what's happened. Okay, I don't actually know, I'm just kind of throwing things in the wind there, but that could potentially be, at this point, that may be making things worse it's more of a management than anything. But what can happen is if like he doesn't get the shock, he learns what he's potentially learning is he is in the situation. If the stim doesn't happen or that noise doesn't happen, he can bite, and if the noise does happen, he can't. Does that make sense? So like he doesn't actually understand what's going on. He just knows that if he does the behaviour when that's on, he's going to get shocked. And when he doesn't do it when it's not on, he has free access to the behaviour, which makes it unpredictable. But the element at this point is the e-collar, and then how we've potentially used the e-collar. And like at this point, like you've only been told to do what you've done, so it's kind of on the trainer. They shouldn't really be putting you in that situation. So that's okay. It just gives us context on potentially how we need to deal with this.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've heard of like positive reinforcement before?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's positive reinforcement, and there's 3 other types of reinforcement that we use. Negative reinforcement, which is like continuous stim on the collar, asking him to sit, and him sitting and letting it go would be negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement would be marking and giving him a treat. Positive punishment is like correcting him for stopping a behaviour. You don't need to remember all this, but just for your guys' idea, there's 4 elements to it. And the last one is negative punishment, which is taking something away from him that he wants. So when you're going and trying to take the bone off him, essentially that's negative punishment, and he's learned to react when you do that, essentially. So what we can do is we can break it down for the dog and make it like slightly more simple, so that we can teach him these concepts without. Yeah, that's all good. I'll just keep that up away from him. I'll just keep that here just in case. So you've done some basic training with him, hey?
Yeah, I'd say he's definitely got the basics down back at least.
Yes. Yes. And has there been like, yes. So like if I was to drop a treat on the ground and then went near it, that's where you think it would trigger? Or just if it's the bowl?
I think it's more to do with the mount. And like I said, if it's a really high value, like a bone or something that's possessed, like you can possess, then
Okay.
So like those dog ears and things like that, you can't go near those when he's got that.
Okay. So see how he's always giving quite a bit of space? Like that's a sign he's uncomfortable? Yes. We'll just start here and give me a bit of a read on him. All I'm doing at the moment is just kind of getting a read on his impulse control levels with like food and how he's responding when I've got food. Like, is he uncomfortable? Is he focused on the food? Is he focused on me? What does that look like? Yes. And this is just kind of like a real basic thing of like trust building. Because essentially if he's like doing this out of insecurity, like any kind of correction can potentially make this worse, like I said. So we just need to start from the ground level and work our way through. Yes. Like his panting and stuff, like you know how he's kind of the circling and pacing, like a lot of that's kind of like insecurity fueled. Yeah. Have any of the trainers so far talked to you about like affection and things like that? Yes.
I wouldn't say so, no.
Okay. So think about affection as no different to this.
Yeah.
Okay, like it's a reinforcer. So like if say like a dog is anxious, and I reinforce the dog for being anxious with a treat, essentially that's going to make the dog more anxious. Same with affection. So if the dog's anxious and I pat the dog, I'm actually potentially making the dog more anxious. Does that make sense? It's reinforcing the behaviour?
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a couple little things as I've been kind of observing that I've identified. So like, do you notice how he comes and sits on you or sits by you and leans into you? So a lot of that stuff at this point we want to stop. So that's resource guarding you. Okay. So in that instance, if you pat him, you're encouraging the resource guarding.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep. So they're like reinforcing it essentially. Yes.
He is obsessed with doing that with it.
Yeah.
He does everything to do.
No.
And you might find like he does that when he gets uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So like something changes in the environment, he gets uncomfortable, he comes and sits with you, and then you pat him, you're now reinforcing him for 2 things. One, the uncomfortability, and then 2, the resource guarding. So it's like a feedback loop. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with resource guarding, yes, you need to look at the whole picture and look at what is around that environment, because there's things that can also like create problems. If that kind of makes sense to you guys?
Yeah.
So like whenever you train a dog, it's like if if I trying to train you in something and say you're like, we're going to work together for the next 3 months every day, let's say, like if I didn't have a relationship with you and you didn't trust me, it would be very hard for you to be your true self.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like if I came along and like our first meeting, I just kind of like overbeared you and just told you what to do, essentially you may see that as an aversive, and then when you're around me, you kind of like cage up, if that makes sense. So that type of training has that type of effect, which may be why potentially you're like starting to see, you've seen some progress in terms of the intensity of the behaviour, but you're seeing unpredictability out of the behaviour. Yeah, I think it's important for me to explain why potentially things are happening, because so the dog will associate this, if we play with the dog at random in this environment, the dog may think that he can escalate at random in this environment, so it becomes inconsistent. So his behaviour will change inconsistently. So by just having like a clear blanket rule of no play inside, it's going to mean he's going to be a lot calmer in this environment. A lot of the time what happens is they start to learn to pick up a toy and gouge you with it and interact with play. Yeah. So once again, it's the same concept. He's learning to, his behaviour is dictating what happens in the environment. And remembering we are a part of that environment. Imagine this environment, we've got 1, 2, 3, 5 cogs within the environment right now, but we are a part of that environment. So if he learns to interact with the environment being us on his own, we're then reinforcing him being able to interact with us. It's the same as like a child. Like if a child came up and was like, Daddy, Daddy, lollipop, and every time you just gave him a lollipop, eventually over time, the child's going to be like, oh, I can just get what I want from Daddy. Yeah, so that's kind of what we've got going on here a little bit at the moment. Not all the time, but it's probably just that 50% when it is happening, is probably throwing a lot of your hard work you've done outside of that environment. And then that's when you're getting frustrated, because you're like, we've done this, but like the dog knows, and you're like, I know you know it, but we're not realizing that those other little 40% is what's creating him to play up. Responding quick, and I can see you've put in a lot of work. So like, I think with the consistent approach, you're probably going to see like I said, we may not potentially fix the resource guarding yet, let's say, but everything else is going to be solved, and then it's going to be easy to deal with. The other big one was just the food. I think at the moment, just like we go back to management, at the moment, while we're getting more control of them and dealing with these little issues, let's just make the management, if there's food on the table, it goes in the crate at the moment. So we just take that away from them. Let's just not put them in that situation at this point, and let's just manage them that way. And then over time, when we get better, we have our more solid communication system. We can look at manufacturing situations and manufacturing these problems like the food and that, once that's all set up. Cool. And like the progression from that would be using the placemat, you know, and having the placemat sitting over here, you know, and just ignoring them and reinforcing that.
Putting it back on there.
And we'll, like, ideally, like I want to recondition that collar at some point, and then we can use negative reinforcement for some of these elements where it's a bit more, where it's probably a little bit more consistent, which will be that low level continuous stim to reinforce behaviours, but we'll build in positive reinforcement into that as well. We've always got to have that, like, something positive involved, otherwise the dog can become they kind of become shut down in like a shell of a dog essentially, and we don't ideally want that, because that can be sometimes when they also become unpredictable. So this is a good time to give them a pat. Nice. And he didn't escalate too much, that's good. So that was good affection. And you can see him starting to like relax, his eyes are shuddering a little bit, like he's looking a lot more comfortable in the environment, would you guys say?
Yeah. 100%.